Hi, everyone. I am Kelly, and this is Vote Her In. Vote Her In is a collaboration between Two Broads Talking Politics and Rebecca Sive, who is the author of Vote Her In, Your Guide to Electing Our First Woman President. So this is our first episode of spring. I'm thrilled it's spring, and we're still in Women's History Month. I'm going to turn it over now to Rebecca, who will introduce today's guest.
So welcome everybody, and welcome to our very special guest. We're really thrilled that she's here, the Attorney General of the state of Michigan, pure Michigan in my mind. I want to just take a minute or two to do a proper introduction. It's also Equal Pay Day, and I don't know whether we'll have time to get into that, but one of the wonderful things here is in Michigan, where I am also, is that 3 women lead the state, the governor, the attorney general, the secretary of state, as well as the senior senator, Debbie Stabenow. So we're really in a unique context here to learn from the attorney general about what it means to be an executive of a big state, a woman executive, and what she sees, in the world around her right now. I said before the start of the show that she'd been all over the media today, testifying at a congressional committee, talking about some changes she's making here. And I just want you to know, as you listen to the Attorney General, that she's only the second woman to serve in that capacity in the state of Michigan. And I did a little research beforehand and found out only 34 of the 50 states have ever even had a woman attorney general, and there are only 8 of 50 today. So we really can learn so much from Attorney General Nessel about how a woman does this. And so we thought we would just dive right in and ask the Attorney General to share with us, how she took this path, why she chose it, and how she arrived in this place in 2018.
Well, when I ran for office, I had never run for any elected office before 2018, and I think honestly I was like a lot of people, and especially a lot of women, not just in the state but all across the United States. I was a big Hillary Clinton supporter and a very big Donald Trump detractor, and I spent the election night and then the next day, maybe several days, sort of curled up in the fetal position, and for a long time wondered what I could possibly do to help make things right in this country. And I went to all the protests, and I made signs, and I screamed and hollered, and I wore my pussy hat, and I did all the rest of it. And at a certain point, I just thought, like, he doesn't care, like Donald Trump and the people who support him and the people who he has put into his administration. He doesn't care that we're out here screaming and yelling and hollering. And I just felt as though the very best way that I could fight back, fight for my state and fight for our country, was to serve as a state attorney general who I had seen having great success suing the Trump administration and more often than not winning. And as an attorney, who had long, spent much of my career suing the state of Michigan, I thought, wouldn't it be great to, instead of suing the state, maybe I could just be the state. Maybe I just represent the state. And I don't know. I just one day was like, I think I'm going to run for attorney general. And then even though I'd never run for a local office or anything else, and it was either the stupidest thing or the smartest thing I've ever done. But I jumped in with both feet, and I don't know, here I am.
Can you just tell us a bit about, after you made that decision to jump in and do more than wear your pussy hat, how you went about going after one of the highest offices in the state, as opposed to, say, starting out at the school board or something like that?
Well, by trade, I'm a trial attorney. I've been a prosecutor. I've been a criminal defense attorney. I've been a civil rights attorney. I've handled all kinds of cases. And I thought, if I can be an advocate for others and sell my case to a jury, and who have done that for, 25 years, now I have to sell, myself. I have to sell who I am and what I want to do for the state of Michigan. And so that's what I did. And I went to I went everywhere. I went to virtually every county in the state. And if you live in the state of Michigan, you know it's a very, very, very big state. I went to every county in the Upper Peninsula in the middle of winter. I went to every random, indivisible meeting, Rotary Club. What if there was if there was some coffee and there were people sitting around a table, I would show up and talk to them about why I thought I could do a better job as Attorney General of this state than some of the folks we've had there previously and other people I was running against. And I guess it worked, but I just tried to outwork everybody, and I think that's really the best thing that you can do if you want to get into elected office.
So we talk to a lot of women legislators, but there's a special focus for Vote Her In on women in executive roles. And one of the key things that an executive needs to do is set priorities. And so, you're in this kind of job where you have both these things coming at you, crises that emerge that you need to deal with as they come, but also need to set long-term initiatives to deal with things like the Flint water crisis. So how do you go about that, setting priorities, figuring out how to balance both the urgent needs, but also the long-term needs of the state?
Yeah, very poorly. I just want to get everything done as quickly as I can, understanding that I have limited time in this office. So, we have term limits in Michigan. We have 8 years is the longest you can be in executive office. And my role model to a large extent was Frank Kelly, who was until recently the longest serving state attorney general in United States history. We just lost him just within the last month at the ripe old age of 96. But he really had remodeled the office of Attorney General, and he made it a very aggressive place to seek and champion the rights of consumers, of the environment, a champion for civil rights. And I saw all the great things that he did in office, and I wanted to do all those things, but the difference was he had 37 and a half years, and I knew that I was only going to have between 4 to 8 years. So I was like, I'm just going to try to do everything I can as quickly as I possibly can, and hopefully some of my initiatives will stick around, and will outlive me. And then there are cases that I want to bring that I need to bring right away, or the next person who comes after me could dismiss those cases. And then there are other cases that I want to settle because they've been around for so long. And I thought the way they were handled, were doing a grave disservice to the people of my state. And so I just decided I was going to do as many things as I could as quickly as I possibly could. I know I run my staff ragged, but I think that they enjoy it because they know how much they're helping the people who live here. I bring a lot to the office in the way of my legal practice and knowing places where people's rights were often violated or compromised. And I just wanted to do right by the people who I represent.
And related to that and related to your setting the priorities for your office, I know that you were testifying earlier today to a congressional committee on the issue of domestic terrorists, I think is how I would describe it. But if you could share with our listeners how that came about. And Michigan has been, I think probably everybody knows who's listening, a sad place for that kind of thing. How you've gone about addressing that issue, not only for Michigan, but as an example for other states.
Yeah, it's been really tragic what I've seen happen in terms of the reputation of our state. And when I go places, I hear it referred to now as Militiagan, because we're so well known for our extremist organizations here. And, it's sad, what I want people to think of when they think of the state of Michigan is the sand dunes of Lake Michigan in our lighthouses, and certainly not a bunch of Duck Dynasty looking dudes in their tactical gear with their AR-15s slapped over their shoulder, invading our state capitol. That's not how I want people to see Michigan. I don't want them to think of, oh, that's the state where the governor was almost kidnapped and executed. I want them to see this for the wonderful people that really live in this state. How did we get to this place? I wish I knew. I know that many things have happened during the course of the last year, especially. You've had this mixture of Trumpism that has brought extremists out of the woodwork because it's made it okay to be a white supremacist or to have extreme ideologies. And then you have in our state this mixture between dense gerrymandering of our legislature. So we have a very red legislature that is dominated by, Republicans that I think don't necessarily represent the people that live in our state. But you have very progressive women who are in all of our executive offices. And so there's that sort of that stress, that conflict. And then we got into 2020 and we had COVID. So you had the female progressive governor, who was issuing, dozens and dozens of executive orders to keep us safe. And that didn't sit well with the dudes that control state government, that control the legislature. They didn't like their lady governor issuing all these executive orders, no matter how many lives she saved doing so. And then the death of George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter protest, which in itself, I think, helped exponentially to bring out extremism and the numbers of groups with some of these ideologies just seem to, exponentially rise overnight. And then the 2020 election, which added fuel to the fire and all the election-related conspiracies, one of which, my favorite, of course, was the Dominion voting systems being rigged. And the architect of that, Sidney the Kraken Powell, who I've, asked for sanctions against, and I actually filed a grievance against her, asking for her to be disbarred. She now, within the last few days, just said, just kidding. All those claims that I made about voting machines all over the United States, turns out that was all a lie that no reasonable person should have actually believed. But who did believe it? 67% of all Republicans, 366 people that stormed the Capitol in an insurrection, legislators all over the United States that are trying to, enact voter suppression laws. So the damage that did alone is really, I think we won't even know for generations just how much damage has been inflicted. But all of these things came together at the same time, and it contributed to the rise of extremism in our state. And that's why we have to do everything we possibly can to combat it.
You mentioned that when Governor Whitmer was making these executive orders and it wasn't sitting well, you and all of the women executives in Michigan have faced a lot of real vitriol from men, especially in the state. How do you deal with that? How do you deal with that kind of reaction? That kind of discrimination against women in the public sphere as you're going about your public life?
I investigate and prosecute them. I mean, I have prosecuted a lot of people for threats against public officials. And that goes all the way from, President Biden to Speaker Pelosi to Governor Whitmer, Representative Alyssa Slotkin, Senator Debbie Stabenow, our, Court of Claims judges. I mean, to me, if we sit back and we just allow this to happen, what it does is it empowers people, and they start off making threats against public officials, on social media or sending them emails or text messages. But then they become emboldened, and then that ends up later on as an assassination attempt. And that's why I think as soon as you start with the illegal conduct, you go after it, and you go after it as tenaciously as possible so that it doesn't accelerate to some sort of more egregious offense later. But I will say what was not helpful was the fact that Donald Trump, mean tweeted at all of us, at the governor, at myself, at Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson. And I just remember, every time he would mean tweet at me, the death threats that would come in immediately afterwards. I always knew that the president was talking about me by the number of death threats I was receiving and that my staff received at the office. And I thought, and if you're president of the United States of America, you are the leader of the free world. You shouldn't even know who a random state AG from Michigan is, let alone spend your time mean tweeting about her on multiple occasions and trying to think of catchy, horrible nicknames for her. I mean, it really sort of speaks to how he brought down the dignity of that office was so significantly compromised by his behavior. But yeah, for all three of us, yeah, you bet we started to get death threats, people coming to our homes, in the dark of night, screaming and yelling at our children. I mean, the list goes on, and our lives are all different right now because of his behavior. Because once people start following you on Twitter, they don't necessarily stop,
Mm-hmm. One of the things that I've contended in various speeches I've given and writings is the fact that if there were equal pay, and others have of course written about this too, there would be a much more equal power dynamic in so many homes. And so perhaps, these guys who are, albeit maybe making modest sums, making more than the women in their households, that's where this, salary differential is so great. Maybe they would behave differently towards women. I don't know whether that's a theory you hold or whether you think it's a more narrow sort of economic issue. But to me, it feels like, equal pay would change the power dynamics in public life a bit.
I don't know. I feel like some of these people that we're talking about are the incels who probably have never been with a woman before in their life. I mean, I say that because I swear some of the behavior that I see, even involving, our state legislators and the way that they treat our governor, the way they talk about her in such misogynistic terms. Honestly, it's astounding to me. And I always think, like, does she remind them of like a girl in high school who would never date them? Or like, what's the issue here that they treat her the way that they do? And it's not that it's so much different for myself or for Secretary Benson or for any of the women in elected office. I don't know how some of these individuals have gotten, the ones who are in positions of authority. It's hard for me to understand, because in my space, in my walk of life, in all the places that I've worked, you would never be able to get away with that. And so I don't know who told them at some point in their life that this was okay to treat women this way. But apparently it's worked for them, because they're like Speaker of the House now and the majority leader in the Senate and places like that. I mean, I'm sorry, I shouldn't say that about the Speaker of the House. I haven't heard that from him, the current one. But certainly our majority leader, yeah, he makes misogynistic remarks about our governor all the time, and he seems to think it's perfectly fine to do so. I think that he truly believes that she doesn't belong in the governor's office because she belongs in her kitchen.
And on that point, just to follow up for a minute, and I do want to be conscious of your time. Do you think that if there weren't such job segregation, between men and women, a pink labor force and a blue collar labor force, that those attitudes, perhaps not among the most vitriolic of these men, but maybe more men toward the middle who are still voting Republican and voted, at least white men, in the majority for Trump?
Yeah, you might be right about that, and I think that, I have always noticed, and I know this from my employment work, it's different depending on what the profession is. And I will say that, as attorneys, probably there is more parity in a lot of ways, because we demand it, because we know what the law is. But I think that people who are not in those positions, and I've talked to many people who, women who work factory jobs, and they are certainly treated with much less respect and dignity than women who might be, in professions involving, graduate school and degrees and so forth. And in fact, I'll never forget, there was a case that came out from the Court of Appeals in Michigan, and it had to do with sexual harassment. And I'll never forget it. And it basically talked about the fact that sexual harassment was more acceptable in certain jobs than others because it was just sort of part of the job if you worked in a factory sort of setting as opposed to if you worked in a law firm or a doctor's office. So it was considered to be more tolerable under the law. And when I read that case, and as far as I know, that is still the law in Michigan, it floored me to say that depending on what your job was, you had to endure different levels of sexual harassment. How demeaning, and classist also, I would say. And that's the kind of thing that I can't off the top of my head tell you who authored that opinion, but I'll bet you it was a guy. I'm sorry. There's no woman I know that would write an opinion like that. Whether they're an appointee of a Democrat or a Republican or what have you. But we've made progress in this state and we've made progress in this country, but we have a long way to go.
So speaking of that, do you have any last words of advice for women who are listening, be they lawyers or other people who might want to be involved in executive office of, sort of how do we get there? How do we get to where we're trying to get to go?
I think you get there by outworking everyone. That's how you get there. And by not giving up. And by not ever letting anyone tell you what you can and can't do. And I will just say real quickly, I mean, if anybody knows my story, they know that the Democratic Party was really dead set against having an all-female ticket as their nominees in 2018 and tried very, very hard to make sure that we didn't have all women on the ballot representing the Democratic Party. And to me, of course, that was so outrageous in 2018 for them just to feel as though we could not possibly win if we had too many women on the ticket, especially since in 2014, we had all men on the ticket. And except for one, they all lost. So that didn't work out so well. So, unfortunately, I mean, we have not reached the point where we have gender parity truly when it comes to everything. But that doesn't mean we don't continue to strive for it. So don't ever let anyone tell you that you can't do something just because you're a woman. And go in with that attitude and just outwork, outperform, and be more knowledgeable than everyone else. And eventually you'll succeed.
And on that point, as part of success, we always talk here about being an active and involved community member and caring about others in your community. Are there, as we close and we say thank you to you, are there any particular initiatives of yours that you would invite our listeners to be engaged in?
Absolutely. So for your listeners who are in the state of Michigan, what I'm doing is we have this brand new set of laws that just passed and are going to go into effect on April 11th that allow for expungements for people who have had criminal convictions for many, many years. And it's really held them back and they could never get them off their record and they finally can. So I'm inviting people in my state to join me in learning how this process works. You don't have to be a lawyer. You just have to spend some time studying this and working with my office and helping people to petition courts all around the state to have old convictions set aside so that they can finally make progress in their life in a way where they can get jobs they were never eligible before, get professional licenses they could never get before, and really move forward for themselves and for their family members. And so I'm inviting volunteers for that. Anybody who's interested. And frankly, whether you're in state or out of state, you can participate. So I'd love to have people help us out with that project.
Well, we invite everyone who wants to learn more about that project and the other things the Attorney General is doing. Go to the Two Broads website. You'll be able to listen to this video cast again. And there are links to her office and to the projects there. And please do avail yourself of that. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure to have you here with us.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks for having me.